Hey everybody, it's Steph from Destination Exploration here with another Technology Thursday post for our At Home with DE series. Today we're going to be working and creating a game in Scratch. We're going to do it in two parts, so let's get started with part one. So the game that we're going to be creating today is a replica of the No Internet T-rex game on Chrome. So this one right here, so I've turned my internet off, you get this little dinosaur, and if you do press the up button you actually start. The time keeps going up, you get little things that come across, you have to jump over them. Right? So you get different points, but it's a very simple game. But the aspects of the game that we're looking at are the fact that it's a X-scrolling game, which means that the player itself actually stays in one spot and the ground itself moves along. So it's kind of like a Super Mario-esque game, like the very beginning Super Mario games. So the first thing, of course, that we have to do is create this background and the ground that's actually going to be moving. So the ground itself is going to be its sprite. So we're not going to use the cat. We're going to go in and first create a background. I'm just going to choose a simple one like this, and we're going to create a sprite. So down here, we're going to go and paint one. So the way this works, so the T-rex game itself is just like a flat line and the dinosaur moves along, or moves through the game. So we're gonna model it simply off of that. So I'm just gonna take the line tool, I'm gonna drag a line. If I hold down shift, I get a straight line and it locks that axis there. So I'm gonna do a line. I'm not gonna make it the full screen yet, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so I've got a line there. I do wanna make it so that there is kind of grass, so we're gonna make it kind of like a sunset type thing going on here. So I'm gonna take my square, I'm going to fill it with like a greenish color. I'm gonna have no outline, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna draw a square like this so that it lines up with my line. Okay, and then this line, we're gonna make this a little bit thicker. Looks good. Okay, push it to the back. So when we're creating this, we just want to build this. We're gonna spend a little bit of time building the background as a sprite so that it works and we don't have to touch it again, because the more we touch it after we start building the code, it's gonna be a little bit harder to deal with. So we've got it here. Now the T-rex game has those little dots, so we're actually gonna make like little kind of rock building things, like my little variation of it. And so I'm just gonna zoom in here. I'm going to make some little boxes. You can see what the sprite looks like up here. And I can take this one, which is the dot tool or the pen tool, and I can create move points and move the different points in here, so it just kind of looks like rocks rather than like buildings. Okay, move this up here so that it's in line with everything. Right, so we've got our rock there. It looks nice, kind of like a sunset era. Make another one kind of over here. I don't want to go too close to the ends, because what we're gonna have to do is basically extend this and make two of them. So the closer I put things to the end, it's actually going to look a little weird. So we want to space them out so that they're kind of just off-centered. All right, we'll move this back to a black. We'll change the points on it here. Maybe add a third one. A little something right down there. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so we've got this here. I'm gonna make it look like it's kind of in the background. Add some depth to it by adding in some brush strokes. So I'm going to have the fill as this. My fill is gonna be, let's say 3. And all I'm gonna do is I'm just going to do some dots in here, putting more concentration of dots at the top near the line there. So it seems as if it's darker far away. And just pressing the Control or Command Z to do undo. And then as we get to the bottom of the square, I'm just gonna make them a little bit more spaced out to give the illusion that we've got some space, some depth of field. Fun art tricks. Right, so we can kind of see what it looks like up here. All right, so that is going to be our sprite here. Now, like I said, I didn't make it the full length, so what we're gonna do actually is grab our pointer tool, grab everything, so we're gonna group it, and then we're going to hold down, grab one of the corners and hold down shift so it scales it up proportionally. We're gonna scale it nice and big like this and kind of put it in the center there. So this is our center mark. We can put it like that, okay? And so again, we can move our sprite like it is here. Everything looks pretty good to me. And there we go. So that's gonna be our sprite. The costume, which is kind of the one costume, we're gonna label it ground. Perfect. So we're gonna go into the code here, and the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that it moves left to right. So we want your person to be sitting at one spot and the ground to make it seem like the person is moving right, which means that the ground has to be moving left to make the illusion that the person is running. So we're going to jump in here, we're gonna grab an events block. When the green flag is clicked, we need to basically move it forever. I'm just gonna keep going. So we're gonna have a forever loop here. We're gonna jump into the motion. We're gonna move steps like this. And so if I press the green flag, it's going all the way to the right. So we don't want that. So we've gotta change it up. So let's add in a negative to change the direction. Awesome. Okay, so we also know that this looks quite high. We want it to blend into the stage so that it looks as if there's only ground in front of us. So let's take this, and so once we've got it into roughly position here, I'm actually gonna make this 0, and minus 25 looks good to me. So I can then go and grab my go to XY position and plop that up here so it's before the forever loop. So it's just going to, whenever the green flag is clicked, it's gonna bring it right back to that spot, and then it's gonna start its code. So it's always like a refresh, okay? So if I go flag, we're good to go, and then we get to the end and we hit a roadblock. So this is important to do this step and check where it ends, because this value, the minus 486, is what we're going to use to tell us when for one of our conditions. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to have Scratch check where the X position, which is our horizontal axis, so where it is on that position, and if it gets past a certain point, so it gets to the edge, it's going to jump back to the other side of the screen and start again. So let's add in a control loop. So an if else, we're gonna plop it right in there, and we're gonna put our move minus 10. So that's always gonna happen unless this condition is met. So we're gonna grab in an operator, and we're gonna use a less than block. So we want the X position of our sprite. So we can go into motion, we're gonna grab the X position right here, and we want it to be less than, so we basically want to check when it gets to minus 486, so we want to make sure that it is less than 485. So we just want to make sure that we have that extra value, okay? So if the X position is less than this, so if it's to the left of this point, we want it to jump up to a new position. So we're going to, just like up here, we're gonna go do like this. And so what we can assume is that the minus 486 is the bound on the left, and because it's symmetrical within the space, we know that positive 486 will be the far right. So let's jump that in. We want to keep the Y value the same because we want it to be traveling along a straight line. So we're just gonna get rid of this like that, and you should see it all going through. So now we've got this nice loop. Okay. First step done, except, the ground ends. So we've got to change that. Okay, let's stop this from rolling here. So what we're going to do is we can take it, and we have to basically do a double ground and start it at kind of an offset time. So all we're gonna do here is we're just gonna go duplicate the sprite. We see it comes up here. We're on ground 2. You can see it's got the same blocks. So what we're gonna do to ensure that the two are linked, we wanna make sure that they're always in the same line. So the first thing we've gotta do is, instead of it going to this arbitrary value that can be changed, we're going to link it to the first one. So we're gonna go into sensing. We're gonna grab this block down here, which is the backdrop of stage, but it actually has variables in it that we can change and use. So first we're gonna deal with the ground. and we want the Y position of the ground. So that's our first sprite. So now when I press the green flag, it should essentially do the same thing as the other one because we've just mimicked the blocks. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that it doesn't just start at 0, which is where we had it in the center. We want it to start at this very end. So we want to use this 486 value and put it up here. So it's going to be 486, and when we press the green flag, it should be a nice seamless loop all the way through. So our ground is always moving, and the rocks just give us a little bit of sense of, movement of time and how fast the ground is going. Okay? So that is that. Now, what if we wanted to change the speed of how fast this is moving? So right now it's moving -10 steps, but what we can actually do is, because later on we may want to change it to a variable so that we can change the level as time goes on. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in here, create a variable, and it's going to be called ground speed. Okay, and we're going to take that here. Ooh. And what I should be able to do is, now that my variable's up here, I'm going to drop that in and plop it in both of the ground variables, right? Because we do have 2 of them, and we want them both to be linked to the same speed. So then what we have to do is, on one of them, it doesn't have to be both, we can put in this set ground speed to a certain number. So what we want it to be negative. We're actually going to use and move this to the main sprite, the player sprite, later on, but just to show you right now, if I put in -10, it's going to go at a certain speed. Okay, so it's going to move -10 steps. If I then change it so that it's -5, it's going to move a little bit slower. So we have the ability to change both the sprites at the same time, and it's just going to make things a little bit easier as we go through. So that is the ground. The next thing we're going to do in this part of the tutorial, so in part 1, is we're going to deal with the player. So when we think about the dinosaur, it actually jumps up, and it doesn't just jump up and down. It jumps, you can kind of see that it slows down at the top, right? So in Scratch, we're going to first create a person, a sprite. So I'm going to jump in here. I'm actually going to use Avery walking, and you can choose whatever sprite you want. You can do it with the bear walking, that works as well too. Try and find one that actually has different costumes that look like the person or the sprite is walking, so that it gives our game a little bit more life as we're playing it. Okay, so we do have that one. We're in here, we've got Avery walking, plop them right there. So within this sprite, we have the rotation through so it looks as if the sprite is walking, which is what we want. So we're going to jump in here, and right away we want the person to be walking, so we're going to do a forever loop. We're going to jump in emotion looks, and all we're going to do is go change costume, next costume. So now when I press the green flag, looks like this person is speed walking on a very slow ground. So this is why we want to put in the control in here, or for our variable, we're going to set the ground speed. We're going to keep it all in here so that we can both change the costume and the ground speed at the same time. So I'm just going to go in and take this block out of here for simplicity's sake. So we're just on the main player sprite. We've got the ground speed set to say -5. We've got our next costume cycling through really, really quickly. Okay, so we want to slow that down, or at least change it, or have the ability to change it. The way we want to do that is we actually want to have the costume change, pause, costume change, pause, because that will slow the movement of the leg. So we're just going to add in a control here. So we're going to change our costume and wait. So maybe not 1 second, let's give it a try. It's pretty slow. That looks like they're moonwalking. So let's try 0.1. Looks a little bit better. Okay, so now we've got them walking. We can increase the speed if we want to too. So say -7. And it's going to kind of look a little bit more connected, so they're not just plopped on top of there. Okay, so what we're doing there is we've got this person walking, everything's good. Now we want them to jump like the dinosaur. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use the up arrow key. So we're going to grab this when the certain key is pressed. We're going to use the up arrow. And first, let's just think it out. We've got motion. What we could choose is change y by 10, and that just slowly increases forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever till our person is gone. We don't want that. We're going to drag them back down here. We're going to first put on this green flag is clicked. We're going to put it into a good position there, so that is -7. Just taking the values from over here. So I've got -7 and -151. So now they should stay there, and as I press the up arrow key, it's going to shift up by 10. Except they don't come back down. And if I press the down key, nothing works. So we want this to happen so that the person goes up and down in this nice fluid motion. So it's actually a parabola. So here comes some math, which is going to be pretty cool. I think it's a little bit more interesting than just having the person go up and down. So if I wanted to do change X or change Y by 10, and then let's say pause, this is one way of doing it, and then change my Y by -10. Woo! By -10, this should technically bring them up and down. So if we make those a little bit bigger so that you can see it, we've got it up, pause, down. When it comes to a game, pretty predictable. We want to have that sense of kind of that pause in there, the variable speed, to make it a little bit more difficult for us to jump over the obstacles. So the way that we're going to do that is, again, like I said, in a parabola. So a parabola looks kind of like this little hill, and we want the person to be jumping up really fast, and then as they get to the top of their jump, their speed is gonna slow down, and then it's gonna slowly speed up again as it goes to the bottom of their jump or at their landing. Okay, so just like you and I jump up in the air, we jump up with a lot of speed at the beginning, and then as we get to the top, we slow down a little bit, otherwise we would go into the stars, and then we come back down and we hit the ground at the same speed that we jumped off of. Okay, so we're gonna do that with some loops. So it's not gonna be as simple as just a change the Y and change the Y again in the negative direction. So let's get rid of these. We're going to use some loops. We're gonna use 2 repeat a certain number of times. Okay, so we'll say repeat 10. We're gonna keep it at that for now. Okay, and so we want this to move. Ooh, we want a Y. Change the Y. On the way up is positive. On the way down is negative. Okay, so what we can do is this should technically work. Okay, so it's doing 10, jumping up by 10 times 10, so it's technically 100. So we went up by 100, down by 100. But you can see that it's a solid up and down. We want it to kind of float at the top and then change again. The way that we're gonna do this, again, we're gonna use a variable. So when we use a variable, it allows us to change one value and affect multiple different things. So we can already see this is a perfect place to use a variable. We've got change by the same number. We want it to always be the same going up and down. Otherwise, you're gonna have your player slowly shifting up or slowly shifting down depending on how you set it. So we're gonna add a variable and we're gonna call it vertical speed or vertical change. Let's try that. Okay, and our vertical changes, we'll uncheck it and we see that it leaves the play field here. Okay, we're going to add it in here so that our vertical change is the same, both going up and down, except if I go in and plop this up at the top here, actually let's plop this, yeah, let's keep it up there. If I set first the vertical change to 10, it means that I'm going up by 10 twice. So we want to make sure that this one is a negative number. In order to do that, we're going to grab our operators again. We're going to use the multiply by. We're going to plop that down here. We're going to multiply the vertical change by -1. So that's going to keep the same value, except just put a negative in front of it. So now when we start, we should see the same thing. And we can change our jump size really quickly by saying if we want it to be 15, it's going to change it both ways, and we get a bigger jump. Okay, now here comes the tricky part. We've got to change the speed. So that's why we've got the loop. So every time it goes through, it's changing by 10. Except what we want to do is we want to first change it by 10, then by 9, then by 8, then 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we're going to build it back up again. So that's going to get our little curve, okay, of how much speed or how high this person is jumping. So you're not actually going to get a change of 100, you're going to get a change of like 50, 60 points, the way it works. So it's like 10 plus 9 plus 8, so it's a factorial. So if you are older and you understand like an n factorial which is an exclamation mark in math, so that's something to look forward to. Okay, so in order to do that, we're actually going to put in a new variable control within our repeats. So first we set we'll change this back to 10 for a nice example. So I've got 10 the first time it goes through, and I want to decrease that by 1 every single time. So I'm going to change my vertical change by 1, but we want it to be -1. This is going to be the confusing part. So we're changing y positively, but we're changing the vertical change, so the speed at which we're jumping up by, which is decreasing, so it's a negative number. So we're changing the vertical numbers. We're changing 10 by -1 every time. So every time it goes through the loop, then we get 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way till we're at kind of 0 at the top of this jump. So now you'll see when I jump up, it kind of slows. We see that impact there, but it doesn't actually come back down. I wonder why. So what we've done, if we put our vertical change up here as a value, when I press the green flag, my vertical change should be it's going to be at 0 because we got it here at the up arrow. But if we press the up arrow, watch the vertical change as it changes. So it's going to start at 10 and then go down to 0. Except that means that by the time it gets to this second loop that we want for it to come down, this vertical change that it's doing is 0. So it's just changing y by 0. We don't want that. What's actually happening is here, we have to increase now this vertical change. And we're going to increase it by 1. So let's try that. There we go. But if you notice, I'm still kind of going up a little bit. Jumping up kind of into the top of the screen here. Now, if you notice, so let's just take a look at this y value down here as I jump. So I've got -7 and then I land at 3. So I've jumped up by 10, which is not what we want. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna jump in here, and we're going to, after this first loop is done, we're just gonna change our vertical change by 1. And that should fix our problem. There we go. So what it's doing there is just because it's getting to a certain point, it's not going actually down, it's going starting at 0 and then adding up to 9. And because of all the loops that it goes through and the factorial and the math that's in there, it's actually losing 10 points. So we're just going to basically shift it back to the starting 0. So as we go through, we're doing jumps like this. So now, just like we did with the ground speed to create this variable that we can change, we're actually going to change, if you notice, this 10 and the 10 of the repeat and the 10 of the repeat always have to be the same. Okay, so the way that it works is you're essentially taking this and you want them to correlate so that you actually get down to this 0 value, because if you go through it enough times, you're gonna get like a high speed at the top where we want it to be 0. So we want these two values to be the same, and there's some math in it that would make more sense if I could draw it out for you, but essentially we want to keep these the same. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna create a variable, we're gonna call it jump, and the jump is gonna jump in here, and the jump is gonna be the same as the number of repeats that we do. So then what I can do is I can take this and I can set my jump to say 10, and I get this little jump like this, we're all good to go. But if I jump and I need a bigger jump, I can do 20. So it's gonna change the number of repeats, which means it's gonna be a longer jump. Okay, and you can really see the pause now as we get to the top. So it looks a little bit more natural. I mean, the sprite is still walking on air, but You know, it's a little bit more like a realistic jump up. Okay, so that is that. We're actually, the way that our obstacles are going to work in part 2 is we're actually going to put in a left and right option just to give you a little bit of leeway. It's not going to be directly like the dinosaur game, but. So that was part 1, where we created the sprite that jumped up and down in a realistic way using a whole bunch of variables. We created a game board that moved on the x-axis rather than having the player move throughout the game, which is what we sometimes normally see. And so in part 2, we're going to build our obstacles and our scoring so that it looks a little bit more like the Dinosaur T-Rex offline game on Chrome. So make sure that you like and subscribe to their YouTube channel so that you get a notification when part 2 comes out next week. And then hopefully you enjoy some of the other videos. If you haven't made any of the other Scratch games with us, make sure you give them a try. And of course, now we're going live on Tuesdays with our Tuesday Triumphs activities. So again, if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification, and we will see you then at 1:30. Until next time, we'll see you then.